Hi, this is Paul. Jonathan Pageau's been on something of a tear with his conversations lately. His conversation with Stephen Woodford, I thought, was really important. And then, much to my delight and surprise, here he and Adam Friended had hooked up for a significant conversation, which I thought was helpful and informative. I've been noticing people on Pageau's channel urging him on to have more conversations with. Uh, I'd say these are people in the IDW space who are so in some ways Rationality Rules was sort of the a chief YouTube critic and debunker of Jordan Peterson, and he rode that horse harder and longer than just about anybody else. And Adam is sort of an anti-anti-theist, and I've had a number of conversations with Adam. Esther has, others have, and Adam's a fun guy to talk to. I've really been wanting to get Adam in a meetup whenever I'm back down in Southern California. I think that's going to happen one of these days. But Adam's an interesting guy because he identifies as an atheist, but he's often taking on, I mean, he's been trolling Stephen Woodford for quite a while. He and Sitch on their Sunday afternoon live streams. And I mean, Adam's just a really playful guy. He likes to have fun. But, you know, during the Jordan Peterson wave, Adam had one of the most important clip channels and sort of morphed into a commentary channel. And Adam was really an important figure during the rise of Jordan Peterson in terms of getting Peterson's stuff out there. You know, often when something before the crash, as it were, before the crashing of the wave, Adam and I would sort of be in a race to who could be the first to get the newest Jordan Peterson tidbit out, and Adam would work fast. So he's been following this conversation a long time, and what's important to remember about Adam is Adam, like many of us, you know, Jonathan Haidt was sort of proto IDW. Jonathan Haidt really set the table for what would come, and Adam is big on Haidt, and he's big on sociology and Durkheim, and that's his perspective on religion and Christianity. He sees Christianity as super helpful and as important for setting up the Western world, and as an incredibly powerful and beneficial religion, but Adam sort of stands outside of it. And so what's been interesting is that a year or two ago, and I talked to a number of these individuals, so I know it annoys some of you when I keep bringing up that I'm a Protestant, but I don't bring that up in a church tribal way here. I bring it up in much more of a sociological way, because Protestantism, if someone just posted a comment on my video, a quote from Jung from his book on Job. Protestants, since the Protestant Reformation, in many ways they were the liberals. They were the ones who brought science to the fore. Now, in American culture, the main line is pretty much ghosted, because if the evangelicals can be the Republican Party at prayer, the Democrats are sometimes, at least white Democrats, are sometimes the Democratic Party at good thoughts and energy increasingly. And that's a little unfair to many in the main line, but those of you in the main line who continue to really try to hold on to historic Christianity can understand some of that too. So now, Jonathan, these recent conversations, I think, say a lot about Jonathan's rise. I mean, when I first got into YouTube, I was starting from the Freddie and Paul show and had a couple of dozen subs, and Jonathan Pageau had about 2,000, and then, you know, he jumped up to 4,000, and when I was still in the hundreds, and, you know, he's got a sub count of about 88,000, which is significant, and his influence has gone. I mean, he's been a tremendously powerful evangelist, as it were, for the Orthodox movement in America. And I'll call it a movement because I think dispersed among the various different liturgical rites elements of Roman Catholic and the Roman Catholic Church and Orthodoxy. I mean, Jonathan's really been, a gateway drug, sort of the bridge from Jordan Peterson into the Orthodox or many of the sacramental churches and even some Protestant churches. But he's got enough of a following now, and he's strange enough. He's an icon carver, and so that for Americans is sort of way out there. He's not a Protestant minister like I am, and so he does art, and he's got his, he has his T-shirts, and he has his cool art, and he's all that going, and so he's a little strange for a lot of people in the Christian atheist space, partly because we're used to seeing Protestants in this arena, and maybe some Roman Catholics like Bishop Barron, but Bishop Barron has this persona of being genteel and smooth and erudite and learned, not so much, not like Jesse Peterson or William Lane Craig. I mean, the Protestants, they're just such a broad bunch in many ways. And Pageau sort of comes into this space, and he kind of confuses people, I think. And as I've said before, it takes a while to understand what he's doing. You see his movie interpretations, and they're very impressive. But then when he starts to talk about basically how he fit his world together, and my first conversation with Jonathan, I sort of pestered him on some of this. I didn't know him well enough or really know his stuff well enough to maybe dig into some of the ways that I would dig into it today. But Jonathan basically grew up in a Protestant household in a very, Quebec, a very French Canadian context. So you've got some, heavy Roman Catholic influence there, but a certain kind of Roman Catholicism. And of course, he had his own journey. He was a foreign missionary for a while, and in many ways became Orthodox through his art. And again, Nathan Jacobs, who I've had on the channel, became Orthodox sort of through his philosophy, even through my alma mater, Calvin Theological Seminary, interestingly enough. So Pageau has enough of a following, he's strange enough, and he's got enough credibility in terms of interest that I'm not surprised to see more people wanting to talk to him, and not just in the sense of they're a fan and they want to, they're a fan and they want to talk to him. That's sort of a normal thing on YouTube. But what's making you tick? Because you've got the movie interpretations, you've got the cultural interpretations, you've got the icons, the art going. So that's all kind of cool. And then there's the Christianity stuff. And what was clear from the Rationality Rules conversation is that people don't peg him too quickly for one of these literalistic conservative Christians like you might find in other places, or maybe some people might see me as. And then suddenly they're a little bit surprised at just how I tell people that, Jonathan Pageau is in some ways so conservative, he sort of comes out the other end for people. Do you really believe in, even my second conversation with Jonathan where we got into angels and demons, what's with, it took me a while to sort of figure out the kinds of things he was talking about, and sort of like Jordan Peterson kind of sneakily colonized Stephen Woodford. After listening to enough Jonathan Pageau, certain of his ideas sort of came together with some of my C.S. Lewis ideas from the book Miracles, and really turned some things in my head with respect to what spirituality and spirit is, and really began to connect some of those elements for me. And you can find that in my conversations about school spirit and some of these kinds of things. And so, I'm deeply indebted to Jonathan Pageau for a lot of what has really interested me and engaged me over the last couple of years. Now, so he's talking to Adam, and I've spoken with Adam a number of times, and I really love Adam. But as often happens with conversations, same with the Rationality Rules conversation, except Adam has a lot less to lose than Stephen Woodford. Woodford much more went out on a limb in his conversation with Jonathan Pageau than Adam did, because Adam's kind of postured himself as an anti-anti-theist, and he's trolled Stephen Woodford, and he's had his fun with that. That's just how Adam rolls. And Adam can troll and he can make fun, but when it's all said and done, there's Adam's an awfully sweet guy, and he's not out there for blood. He's in many ways doing similar things to what I do sometimes with some of my more snarky or trolling content, trying to illuminate some of these things in an interesting and engaging way. And the thing about Adam is that he can dish it out, but he can also take it. And you'll see that on the Adam and Stitch live streams, and Sitch, not Stitch, Sitch, PSA Sitch. Adam can also take it. He can laugh at himself, and that's part of the reason that Adam's such a good conversation partner. But Adam is very much speaking from, and I don't know how much Adam stuff Jonathan had listened to, but I've listened to a lot of Adam stuff. So we've spoken a few times, and so I pretty much kind of know where he's coming from with a lot of this stuff. And so nothing in this conversation surprised me. But probably what I was most excited about in this conversation were, again, some of the ways that Jonathan is having to try to elucidate his framing in a way that people like Adam and Stephen Woodford will understand. Now, today I just had a conversation with Guy Sengstock, and he said that he was going to talk to Jonathan. I thought, wow, Jonathan's practically on tour. I think this, I'm ecstatic about this. I think this is terrific, because I think now Guy Sengstock is a big Heidegger fan. So in that sense, and Guy Sengstock is a consummate conversationalist. I mean, Guy developed that circling protocol, and so talking to Guy is a very easy thing to do. He's got tremendous conversational skills. So it'll be interesting to see where that comes out. And but I think in some ways, some of these more, they're not really adversarial, but some of these contrastive conversation that Jonathan is having with Adam and with Rationality Rules, I see this as really helpful, because I think it's showing in many ways it's displacing the kind of positioning that Christianity has been placed in by the broader secular frame. I was just this afternoon reading some Justin Martyr and thinking about how, so if you look at Justin Martyr, probably came from the area of Samaria, but very deeply formed as a Greek in the Hellenistic world. And when he becomes a Christian, what there is for him is via the various philosophies around the Stoicism, the Pythagoreans. I mean, all of these schools of philosophy around. What many of these church fathers are able to do are take some of the commonalities, Platonism, Neoplatonism, take some of these commonalities and map Christianity on them. And Christianity is a very subversive religion. People sort of take it in because they see what it can do, and Jesus very quickly starts to own them. So I did a conversation today that I already posted with Nick, and I'm just watching this happen. You're not going to start playing with Jordan Peterson and very, very deeply without Jordan sort of taking up residence in you, and it seems Jesus sneaking in through on his own. And Jesus is very sneaky that way too. But part of what we're struggling with is that in talking to Adam or talking to Rationality Rules, there's the sort of default there's sort of the default materialism that is the public conversation frame in our culture. Okay? That's the default position, and Christians either have to break from it. If you go back a couple of weeks and look at the Bridges of Meaning conversation where we did the panel discussion about Pentecostalism and miracles, and that led to the very interesting connection between all these former Pentecostals now kind of moving to the Orthodox, because the symbolism and the sort of miraculous, this present darkness, what's the name of the author, that becomes a bridge and able to connect them. And that was really one of the takeaways from that panel discussion that we had on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, how these things are connecting, because Christianity, we're cutting the cord at home in terms of television, and so I'm playing around with the over-the-air stuff and stumbled onto the Andy Griffith show, and that just brings you back into the pre-9/11, the pre-9/11 compact, where science provided the ideation for the material below, but Christianity provided the ethics, or at least the form of ethics that was dominant in American culture at that time. And, I've been over that history quite a bit on my channel, where, science sort of, we're going to get all of our science stuff from science, and we'll get all of our moral, ethical stuff from Christianity. And of course, with the rise of the new atheists, it's like, no, Christians are not sort of prudish or elitish in terms of their morality. They're anti-moral. And that's part of the reason why the sexual revolution, these are going to keep coming up in these conversations, because these are the friction points between an implicit worldview, which in the case of many who are not participating in religion, is simply not terribly explored, versus Christians like Jonathan Pageau, who very much had to build his own and sought, some very ancient resources in the church fathers. So he keeps bumping into materialists, and so what Jonathan is doing is really hard for materialists to understand, because as Jonathan says here in the clip I'm about to play, Jonathan is reframing everything. So let's see, let's pull it up and let's start it here. Oh, I got to get my sound properly going.
Christianity and
the beginning, it's just a normal cycle of things.
Well, I view Christianity and different religions as these ethical systems that are uniting people and allowing people to cooperate with one another. That's the way that I see these ethical systems. So
what if?
Okay, so that's in many ways one of the hacks that happened in terms of modernity, how to not fully displace Christianity. So it becomes an ethical system. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means it becomes an ethical system. It becomes sort of an ethical overlay to science. And this is where you get sort of these separate magisteria, and where the scientific image looks at science and the manifest image is going to look through Christian values. And as Tom Holland, I think, explored deeply and persuasively, Christianity completely colonizes the ethical system. And this value of love, this value of regard for the weak, this value simply becomes so pervasive that even anti-Christians use this value against Christianity, as René Girard noted. So for Adam to see Christianity as an ethical system fits completely with the modernist compromise, where Christianity is displaced from material considerations, but is allowed to reign in terms of a value system with respect basically to humanism. And so that's how Adam sees it. Well, then that's because that's the way it's been seen. But now Pageau is going to lean into, well, what does he think?
If we could say that it's not an ethical
one another. That's the way that I see these ethical systems. So
what if we could say that it's not an ethical system?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Christianity and I don't think religions are ethical systems. I think that that's one of the problems which makes it hard for people to understand religion, is because if you think that if they're an ethical system, then you don't understand why you have to build an Ark of the Covenant and have two angels with their wings touching, and you don't understand why you need to have veils around holy places. All of this stuff makes no sense if it's just an ethical system.
The sound on their video should be a little bit louder from here on in. I'm trying to get the sound levels right. It's a perpetual problem with my videos going way back. But notice what Jonathan said. So the temple, the veils, all of the not just the liturgy, the pageantry, the vestments. If Christianity is an ethical system, well, none of that makes any difference. Well, now what we're barking on. I'm kind of barking at the door metaphors. No, the door we're knocking on here is the Wittenberg door, because in many ways this was a deep part of the transition that happens in the Protestant Reformation, where Christianity very much gets psychologized and turned into an ethical system. And of course, later on, as the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and Darwin come down the line, that's sort of the lane that's created for them. And Protestantism had already sort of had the iconoclasm, where you get rid of the vestments and you get rid of the statues, and you have the plain, you meet in the meeting hall. And so what you're doing is you're doing stuff from your head on up, and all this tactile physical stuff makes no difference. And this is exactly what Pageau is pointing to at this point, that Christianity is not an ethical system, because otherwise you don't understand how Christianity colonizes your architecture and your art and all of these aspects. Now, even for a tradition like mine that loves to quote Abram Kuyper, that there's no square inch of planet Earth that Jesus Christ doesn't stand over and claim, my tradition has a problem here, because, well, is there such a thing as Christian architecture? And so Abram Kuyper went around, and so you had, all these Christian institutions. That's sort of what happened in my tradition. But what Pageau is noting is that with this reframing, it's not just an ethical systems. The ethics follow. There are ethical understanding, but it's a far more thoroughgoing reframing. And that's what Jonathan is talking about. And that's why Jonathan is majoring in the symbolic, because basically via symbolism, that's how the frame is moving in and colonizing the rest of life. And so what he says right there is, now there's another aspect to that. I remain a Protestant, and a little bit later in this conversation with Adam, there's another very interesting part that I'm not going to play because I wanted to keep this short. And of course, it will not be short. There's a lot going on right here. And right here in this moment is where you see Jonathan asserting something that is deeply difficult for default materialists to understand or embrace, because our default worldviews are in many ways highly resistant, and in fact necessarily so. They're beneath the level of our direct cognitive and volitional reach. We don't just change our worldview because we choose to. It's far lower in the stack than our conscious selves can really reach down and change. In order to change your worldview, this again, going back to Jonathan Haidt, you have to retrain the elephant, and which is what all of the stuff in Christianity and church and community does. Community reshapes the elephant because the elephant moves in packs and herds. And so when these two are talking at this level, there is no way in the world, and I'm saying this as a Christian minister, there's no way in the world Jonathan can talk Adam out of his default worldview at this point. He might be able to raise questions. He might be able to raise suspicions. But in many ways, a lot of what Jonathan does in terms of his art and his symbolic stuff is gets at and erodes or begins to at least show cracks in the plausibility structure of the default materialist worldview. People switch their default worldview very slowly, rightly so, but there has to be dramatic reasons for it. And if you go back to Jordan Peterson's conversation with David Nasser, where after the Liberty University convocation, you see Jordan, taking the opportunity to talk to a real live Christian minister who's got quite high status given the position he has at Liberty University, but also a lot of credibility. And he's got a lot of credibility with me, at least the little that I've known and seen of him, to talk about, these transformations. Well, what does Jordan mean by transformations? I did a number of videos on that a while ago. These conversions, and what happens in a conversion often is that there is a displacing of the deep of the worldview very low in the stack. Now, just like where this is in our stack isn't directly accessible volitionally from us, neither is it are we terribly conscious or aware of it. Most of the time, it's days, months, or years later, we look back and say, wow, I don't believe what I used to believe. In other words, it's that foundational and low in the stack that we don't see it directly. But that's exactly why these kinds of conversations are so difficult to do. And in many ways, as Eugene Peterson, who was a Presbyterian minister, died not very long ago, wrote a lot of really interesting books. Very much a Protestant, sort of an old line, an old school Protestant who hadn't really swung way out to the woke. And one of his last things that he sort of got in trouble for was he was asked about, he was asked the gay question, and he gave sort of an off-the-cuff answer, which was deemed a little bit too progressive for his evangelical audience and publishers, and he quickly retracted. And it was rather sad to see a really remarkable career somewhat sullied by that moment of when Eugene Peterson was getting quite up in years. But anyway, why did I get into Eugene Peterson? Because these things are best, Eugene Peterson riffing on, I can't remember the poet, tell it slant. You have to go in direction. He'd write these kind of storified commentaries, Leap Over the Wall on David and Reverse Thunder on the Book of Revelation. And Eugene Peterson very much got at this idea of you don't approach these things directly because they're not accessible to us. It's sort of like logging into Windows and wanting to hack the kernel. Windows isn't going to let you down that low in the stack. If you really want to change it, you're going to have to address the elephant, and most of the time we're talking to the rider. Okay, so again, that's setting up what we saw here, and maybe I'll replay it.
It's actually more. You need.
YouTube should be able to just back up instantly from this. This is
one of the problems which makes it hard for people to understand religion, is because if you think that if they're an ethical system, then you don't understand why you have to build an Ark of the Covenant and have two angels with their wings touching, and you don't understand why you need to have veils around holy places. All of this stuff makes no sense if it's just an ethical system. It's actually more than an ethical system. It's a frame of reality. It's a way to understand value and to understand, not to understand, but to participate in hierarchies of being.
Right there. And that is, if you want to understand Jonathan Pageau, his mission, why he became Orthodox, his love for the liturgy, his understanding of story, his understanding of identity, participation. There's the word. Again, now go back to Vervaekean, fancy Vervaeke terms, 4 ways of knowing, the 4 Ps: propositional, participatory, procedural, perspectival. Participation is a much deeper way than what had come, at least to the conscious level, of Protestant confessionalism, whereas I believe and I subscribe to these things. Now, that propositional is one of the 4, but it's much more participatory. And so suddenly you get to understand, okay, why the vestments, why the pageantry, why the cathedral, why the iconography, why you're participating and you're reenacting. Now, there's some really high voltage Protestant Reformation lines running through here, so I got to tiptoe a little bit carefully, but I want to point them out because this is what's going on, and this is why sort of this default materialism that is sort of inherited from the mainline 2-channel path, where science for the public space, think whatever you want, supply your own narrative for the private space, where that system is falling apart because modernity is going away. And I mean, that theme I've been playing for a while. That's why we can understand the rise. Thank you, Dr. Jim in Idaho. That's why we understand the rise of the celebrity atheist, the new atheist. Why the rise of Jordan Peterson. Why the rise of the woke church. And now, in some ways, as Jonathan Pageau has said, why now he can have a hearing, because he's talking about a frame transfer, not simply this kind of evolutionary adaptation that has been happening in the waspy Protestant world for the last couple of hundred years.
Okay.
So that these hierarchies lay themselves out and create units. So it has more to do with identity than it has to do with ethics.
And if you go back and you listen to his conversation with Stephen Woodford and the gay thing comes up, right there is the question. Is gay an identity, or is gay is same-sex sexuality a behavior? Well, we've made it an identity, and again, you have to read some Charles Taylor if you want to take a deep dive into why did we make that an identity? And then the question, does it actually work as an identity? I was talking to Job on the Discord server, and he was talking about some of his transgender friends, and I've noticed exactly what Job has, where I have gay and transgender friends who have been this way for a long time, and they approach it very differently from a lot of the young woke activists. For them, it's a part of their life, but one of the things that they've learned is once it was no longer front and central to their salience hierarchy in terms of a bunch of other behavioral and procedural and cultural changes, it sort of settled down into probably the way that opposite sex attraction is for many of us who have been living with that a long time in our lives. And an identity gets into the whole agent-arena relationship. An identity functions within an arena. And now we are all embedded within multiple arenas at the same time. I am a Christian with regard to one arena. I am a father with regard to another arena. I am a minister with regard to another arena. I am a citizen with regard to another arena. So you have all of these arenas, and hopefully they all fit together. And what Jonathan is very much doing is trying to articulate a different frame and talking about why a frame. And as he says, I don't know if he says it right now, but Christianity fits in this frame. Now, again, if you read the Church Fathers, you read Justin Martyr, you read almost anyone from the ancient world, you will see a similar thing. You know, St. Augustine becomes a Christian after being a Manichaean, after getting into Neoplatonism, because Christianity seems to fit the best and make the most sense, but he's within this other frame. And he understands others within this frame. And so that's what's happening. And so now Pageau is in many ways bringing in sort of an attempt to take something like these old frames and say, these frames are still here. Now, C.S. Lewis was working on similar things. Again, if you read his book, The Discarded Image, you see him walking through the ancient frames and talking about how they functioned and seeing how Christianity, you know, over a long time fit into that. Now, that's very much what happened with the Church Fathers. Is they figured out how Christianity fit into that frame. Now, it raises a very interesting question in terms of the relationship between Jerusalem and Athens, and I won't go there. But these are deep, long, old conversations. But again, so what we see in these little conversations between Jonathan and people who have the default materialist frame, they're sort of, you know, figuring each other out. But again, the riders are on top talking, but the elephants are kind of bumping into each other, and you know, hate to get a little too graphic, but smelling each other and feeling each other, and well, Pageau just feels different.
Has more to do with who you are, what your place is in the world, and what's your relationship with others. And then downstream from that, you have rules and regulations and let's say ways of acting. But at first, it's like we worship the thing that unites us. Mm-hmm. We celebrate the thing that unites us, just like a basketball team.
And again, I mean, read Jonathan Haidt's. Look at Jonathan Haidt's talks about you go around and around. You meet around the flagpole. You go around the great mosque on your pilgrimage. You come into church and you march together and you do together. It's all training of the elephant. Okay, and so you worship. Well, what is worship? You direct yourself to the thing, you know, that is at the top of or above the hierarchy itself, above the hierarchy of hierarchies, and you direct all of your attention to that. And so then the rest of your life goes down there, and how you act is a function of how the world is. And now that's exactly why Rationality Rules will talk about, well, sow a field with two kinds of seed, or create a fabric of two kinds of cloth, or have the women menstruate, go outside the camp, or, I mean, again, if you the ethics is always downstream from the frame. It's just that if you're living in a culture where your frame is not constantly exposed, you're probably fairly unself-conscious about the implications of your frame. Now, many Christians, you know, one of the videos that have sort of been gurgling inside of me for a long time is trying to make a bigger exposition of, and maybe the framing conversation will help me sort of have an organization to it to make it intelligible, why different Christian camps behave as they do. What's really the difference between someone who's Pentecostal and, let's say, a secessionist Baptist? What's really the difference between a plain church Calvinist and a smells and bells and cathedrals sacramentalist? And why the merging and the overlapping and the longing back and forth between some of these ends of the spectrum? But if you understand this frame distinction and understand that Jonathan Pageau is proposing a transformation that is beneath the volitional access of the people he's talking to, and in many ways very strange to the default presuppositions. A little later in this video, Adam will talk to him about presuppositionalism, and I just had to laugh. And Jonathan says he didn't know anything about it. And so, yeah, it's a bunch of the Calvinists that have been harping on presuppositionalism for years because, and Adam sort of laid out a philosophical presuppositionalism, well, and also certain elements, because there's different varieties and stripes of this. But this has been something that's been big in my tradition, when by theological terms trying to get at this frame question. And of course, in many ways, the frame question came to the fore with the advent of artificial intelligence and the development of robots, and the reality that you can't just slap a camera in front of a car and have the car know to stop or stay in the lane like increasingly the cars right now. No, the machines have to be trained. And this is where a lot of the stuff that Jordan Peterson throws at Sam Harris in Vancouver 1, there's an a priori structure beneath you that you can't forget. Well, here Jonathan is saying the reason you can't understand me is because I've got a different frame. And people look at him like a cow looks at a new gate. But that's what's happening here. So in many ways, the conversation with Adam was, it went a little bit easier. That's just sort of because of who Adam is. Adam's an easy guy to talk to. And I haven't talked to Stephen Woodford, so I don't know how easy he is, but I'm a pretty easy guy to talk to. But Adam's an easy guy to talk to. But this is what's happening. And it's these are, Pageau has become a very strange elephant. And both he and Adam are artists, and so they have that in common, but they're trying to figure out Pageau. Why would he be like this? Well, it's because of exactly what he just laid out. And every time you hear, I think, again, these conversations are really helpful for Jonathan, because his rider on his elephant is learning with every increasing conversation how to articulate the conflict. But again, laying it out won't change the person you're talking to. Our processes are far slower, where we recalibrate far more slowly, and we only switch systems. I mean, the deep systems, not just I'm a Christian, I'm not a Christian, yada, 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 all at this level. And what Jordan Peterson said in Lafayette College is exactly right. I mean, the chattering rider, I'm a Christian. Oh, okay, well, we'll see. Well, what do you mean by that? Aren't I what I say I identify as? I'm skeptical. Why? Because I've watched enough people. Why? Because my categorizations are different. Why? Because my framing is different. What? So that's what's going on here. So I hope this became a lot longer than I hoped it would be, but that's the story of my channel.